Every year, maybe 2-3 weeks before Yom Kippur, my rabbinic inbox is flooded with questions. Do I really have to fast? When God told the Jews not to eat on Yom Kippur, was He actually talking to me, or was it just in general? It'd be nice if there are other people who did it, but not me. A couple of words about fasting, about who's considered sick, who's considered exempt, who's considered kind of touch and go. We have this Halakhah concept. These are the mitzvot that one should fulfill and should live with them or through them. Now the Gemara points out, the Torah does not expect you to observe the mitzvot and die as a result. Tell it to some people. So, if there's a mitzvah that is going to cause you to die or be killed, you should transgress, unless, not to be
part of the big three.
The big three, which sounds a little bit Christian, but the big three.
Well, I heard that expression from you on another discussion.
Right, the big three. Okay, so as long as you have a saving grace, you're okay. So the big three. What are the so-called big three? So you will not get anywhere trying to save your life by having inappropriate sexual relations. In fact, you will endanger your life both spiritually and physically nowadays. You will not endear yourself on God by saying, I killed him because they were going to kill me. You can't substitute one life for another when it comes to murder. There are plenty of reasons you might have to kill someone or want to, but it's not to say that it's always justified or justifiable, but there is no justification in... this is the famous Nuremberg trials after the war. They tried these Nazis. 10 of them, one of them committed suicide before the trial. It happened to be a transvestite, by the way, but that's in the papers.
What, sir?
A transvestite.
Oh.
No. It's in the papers, you see.
Oh, really?
With the cup?
Huh?
Whoa.
No, he committed suicide. I mean, he was a cross-dresser.
The cup?
One of the Nuremberg Nazis, the 10 officers that were tried.
Okay, I thought you were talking
No.
There were only 10?
Huh?
There were only 10?
I think there were 10 officers that were tried as part of the original trial, and one of them committed suicide. He hanged himself before. He was wearing women's clothing. All right, anyway, look it up. You'll see it's there. Not only was anti-Semite, he was also a transvestite. I'm just, when it rains, it pours.
They're not Haman's sons, no?
There is. Newsweek wrote an article about that in 1946 or 47. Yeah, very weird. Look it up. It's a very bizarre article, but it's freaky. So yes, so there was. So the other 9 officers. What was their legal defense, so to speak? Yes, we killed millions of Jews, but we were fulfilling orders. If I didn't fulfill my orders, they would have killed me. In other words, I, a lousy German, am worth more than 6.5 million Jews. In other words, do the math. Would you be okay with them killing a blonde German? All they wanted to do was kill Jews. So the answer is yes. That's definitely criminal of you, and your life is worthless. You don't have the right to make decisions like this. I'm going to live and they're going to die, even if you're fulfilling orders, even if someone else threatened to kill you, which didn't necessarily even have to be the case at the time, but for them it was a justification. So illicit sexual relationships, murder, killing someone else in order to save your life. And the third example that was is idolatry. You can't bow down to, or kiss, or hug, or caress, or sacrifice to, or pour wine or water libations, or anything else that's considered idolatrous, or the ways of worshipping a particular avodah zarah in order to save yourself. Plus, we have to add, there's this whole category of what's called Kiddush Hashem, where really if the Goyim make an example of a Jew in anything, according to the Rambam, learns this from the Gemara, Bishat Gizara. If the Goyim were trying to convert the Jews and they try to force them to do things that aren't even necessarily Avodah Zarah, not even necessarily an accessory to Avodah Zarah, there's a good chance the same rules would apply. So, short of these things, let's call them the big 4, you have no such obligation to die whilst trying to perform or observe a mitzvah, or while trying to avoid performing an avirah, or transgressing an avirah. So if you happen to be on a deserted island, right? And the deserted island, all they have on this island are pigs. There are no cows or goats or lambs to be found. I would commit suicide before I even arrived in such a place. Assuming you were there and you had no other choice, so you would be halachically wrong. You would be halachically incorrect for saying, I'm not going to eat the pork. I don't want to, transgress this particular issur, even if it means I'm going to starve. You can live off of fruits and vegetables for a while, but if it was this or die, the answer is, I will eat it. That's okay, no problem. In fact, says the Rambam, if you're in such a situation, you are basically guilty of suicide. You're guilty of having killed yourself if you could have saved yourself in a way the Torah itself permits. Anyone, he says, who allows anyone who allows him or herself to die whilst trying to defend a principle that's not necessarily one of these vital, crucial, Torah principles, he says, you are responsible for your own death. At the same time, someone who tries to save him or herself while transgressing one of these, let's call them the big four, the big three plus Kiddush Hashem. So he says, then you nonetheless don't get punished in a big din, but you're definitely responsible for the transgression.
Would you have to do shechita in that case, if the animal is not kosher?
It's a good question. If there's a difference between what's called a nevela or not, so would shechita actually help? The answer is probably not. There's no change in status. It's interesting. It's a different question, but if you have an animal and you... Right, well, there's some bracha for sure. Oh, you make a bracha on the food itself? Yes, good question also. Best of my recollection, the answer is no. But if it's a surati, it's only permissible in certain circumstances. But the question of shechita is something else, because when you do shechita to an animal, so here's an interesting example. What if I have an animal in my herd? We digressed a little bit, but what if I have an animal in my herd? I have to go to Western Pennsylvania to pick up some lambs. Okay, so one of these lambs, I noticed it didn't take very well to the travel time. 5 hours in a trailer, it got a little bit upset. So I'm concerned that it's going to die, right? So what happens if I do shechita before it dies? Like, is there even a reason for me to do this? So first of all, the animal might be kosher anyway. Doesn't matter. But still, there's a difference in that if it dies on its own, it's a nevela, and if I killed it through shechita, then it's not a nevela. It doesn't ever acquire the status of tum'ah. So I can pick it up and carry it. The kohen can handle it. Doesn't contaminate himself. So, but whether or not these animals are considered a nevela or not after they've been slaughtered is a good question. So I might do shechita only because this might be a way of turning it into food without it ever going, like, becoming a nevela. So for the purpose of tum'ah and tahara, it might help.
Because if in a way you are anus because there is nothing else to eat, so why you adding averot to averot? I mean, if you don't do
So there's no mitzvah to eat slaughtered pork, if that's your question.
Okay.
There's a very Italian mentality to im kvar az kvar. If already I have to go, I may as well go with a smile, But no, the answer is no. You're not going to save anything. Maybe the contrary, or fool people into believing there's a difference between this and that. But anyway, plus shechita is really hard to do with pigs. It's pretty hard. Well, the Midrash says, right, that the two animals the Torah points out that have one siman of kashrut and not the other, the pig and the donkey. So the pig and the camel. Sorry. So the pig likes to flaunt what's kosher about it and is embarrassed about what's not kosher about it. So it rolls around on its back and shows everybody its kosher feet, but it hides its neck because it doesn't have, it's not managira, it doesn't ruminate. And the camel likes to brag about the fact that it ruminates and has a big, long, beautiful neck, but because it walks on its feet and not on toes, it sits on its hands and feet like this, and it hides them, like clever midrash. People like this, folks. It's the truth. Everybody likes to brag about what's kosher about them and hide what's not. This is ultimately asar t'mei teshuvah. You have to be cognizant of such things. So, at any rate, fasting on Yom Kippur would not constitute a mitzvah or a transgression of an avera for which one should willingly relinquish one's life. So, that having been said, following what the Rambam says, I would actually be guilty of neglect, of negligent homicide, if I were to allow myself to die on Yom Kippur. So, a couple of rules when it comes to pikuach nefesh. I actually got an email about it just this afternoon. This afternoon. The whole week I've been answering questions on this. What happens if... So you have situations of pikuach nefesh, right? If I, in theory, had a doctor, and the doctor took a blood test and said, you know what, Mr. Mizrahi, if you don't eat now, you're going to, collapse, get hypotension, your blood sugar is too low, whatever it is. So I have a doctor come and tell me, you have to eat now or you're going to die. So this is certainly a situation of pikuach nefesh. There's no argument. What if I have a sfek pikuach nefesh, right? What happens if a doctor were to come and tell me, listen, right now your levels are pushing the limits of low, but if you were to go another hour or two without eating, you might go into some kind of state of dehydration or I don't know, mild hypoglycemia. So it's not a life-threatening situation per se. It's a potentially life-threatening situation. So it's not pikuach nefesh for sure. It becomes sfek pikuach nefesh. Sfek pikuach nefesh, we are lenient, right? We don't take chances with these things. So what's another example of this? On Shabbat. Let's say a building collapses on Shabbat. Familiar with this? Go ahead. So a building collapses on Shabbat.
Vaguely, remember, yeah.
Vaguely. So this is one of Gemara's classic examples. Building collapses on Shabbat. And we have to violate Shabbat in order to save the people that the building collapsed on.
But you don't know if they're still alive or not.
We don't know if they're still alive or not. Or parenthetically, we don't know if they're Jewish or not. Discussion for another time.
Right.
It's not so clear. We're violating Shabbat to save non-Jews, but it's done. So I don't know if they're alive or not. It's a sfek pikuach nefesh. I don't know if they're going to survive or not. Might be a sfek pikuach nefesh. Like someone whose head is detached from the body. Again, we came back to this, Oklahoma. But someone whose head is detached from the body, this is like a halakhic death. This is a halakhically certifiable situation of death, even if the person is still, in theory, talking or blinking. I mean, like it's clear they're not going to survive this. By the way, the only situation in which even an EMT is permitted to declare someone dead, if the head is actually separated from the body, that there's no chance of survival. But if someone was bleeding profusely or was already unconscious or not showing vital signs, things like this, so we would still, even though it's almost mathematically probable, in fact it's almost mathematically impossible such a person would survive, we might still nonetheless make the efforts on Shabbat. Not that I would have done anything wrong even if the person didn't survive. It's like sfek pikuach nefesh. We're still very, very lenient. How lenient are we? Well, it depends. If someone has a known condition, and this known condition has known dangers associated with it, the best example is diabetes. Right? It's very dangerous and very crazy for somebody with diabetes to fast. I mean, it depends on the diabetes, depends on the nature of the diabetes. Consult your local doctor, but the way it generally works is that these people, these diabetics, they don't metabolize sugar very well. And because they don't metabolize sugar very well, either they metabolize it too aggressively or they don't metabolize it enough. They have to constantly eat in order to keep a certain sugar level. So it's not really advisable for them to go very long periods without food, because what happens, the blood sugar drops very, very low and lots of bad things happen. And if the blood sugar gets too high, which usually is not the result. I mean, if you eat too much or eat out of control or eat too many sugary things, then the sugar finds somewhere to go, like your eyes or your feet. So it's a bad condition to have. It's not necessarily life-threatening as long as it's managed, but if managing it means you have to eat something, you have to eat something. There are certain medications that are best taken with food. That's not necessarily Yom Kippur material. That's like, your stomach might get a little bit upset if you have, I don't know, aspirin. I used to take aspirin. I'm the only thing to make aspirin anymore.
Or Zipperman.
Hardcore antibiotics, I guess, in some cases. But there are certain medications that are supposed to be taken when you eat stuff. So what does that mean? Say, like, will I die if I have it on an empty stomach? Will I get a little bit unpleasant feeling in my stomach? I mean, you're fasting, right?
I mean, if you have a massive
You're not
headache and
supposed
you're
to
in bed.
That's something else. These are some of the criteria by which we judge what's called the chole. Maybe she'en bo sakana, maybe she'esh bo sakana. We'll talk about that in a second. Here I'm talking about medications. So you'll have sometimes indicated on the bottle of the medicine, like take this with food or take this with water, etc. How crucial is the food or the water? I don't know. If it's only to make it a little bit more comfortable or because it might cause a slightly upset stomach, I'm not so sure I'd recommend taking it with water. If you can do without it, do without it. It's impossible. You choke, you have a hyperactive gagging reflex. I mean,
Well, if you're like 92 and you're taking medication for your heart, you have to eat.
so again, if it's something that clearly is going to cause, I don't know, I'm not so familiar with the nature of heart medication. Most of the questions that I get are like teenage 20s, 30s questions. I haven't had too many congregants that are in their 90s, but I guess arthritis medication, you hear about stuff like this. So if it's just something that causes a little bit of minor discomfort, not really halakhically inclined to say, go ahead and forget Yom Kippur, because you might get a little bit of a stomachache for a few minutes. That's not really the way it works. There are certain things or certain symptoms that we typically do define as potentially life-threatening. And this is true not just for Yom Kippur, it's true for Shabbat. So you may as well be aware of both because they have applications in more than one area of Halakhah. One of them is any damage or potential danger to your eyes. Chazal are very sensitive to this. If someone had some kind of eye trauma, splinters or nails or broken glass or I don't know what, I mean, it could very potentially be justification for an immediate violation of Yom Tov, not even Yom Tov, Yom Kippur, it's really a category of its own, but a violation of Shabbat. Damage or serious damage to one of your limbs, so a broken arm or leg, some potential dangers that could arise from it, but if you're at risk of losing a limb, you know, like a really badly broken arm, bad mechanical accident, I don't know, some crazy elevator thing, and things like this that happen. So you'd also be within your rights to violate Shabbat or Yom Kippur. Internal damage or internal trauma, internal bleeding doesn't really stop as quickly as it does outside the body. Also potentially dangerous. One level less than this is what's called Choleh Shenafal Mishkav. I think Choleh Shenafal Mishkav, someone who is ill and who, well, literally read, someone who you know, fell into a horizontal position, like someone who got so sick, sounded like someone who got so sick and passed out. We don't translate it this way. We read it as someone who got so sick they had to lie down. That's one of these halachic categories. So, if it's a bad headache, you might be considered a choleh she'en bo sakana. You might consider someone who's sick. It's not life and death kind of headache. Not too many of those. That'd be like an aneurysm. But if it was a bad headache that made you lie down, here we already put you in a separate halachic category. There are certain things that we would enable you to do. For example, on Shabbat, you might be able to give someone like this a variety of medications. Even though generally we try to avoid taking medicines on Shabbat unless they're absolutely necessary. If it came to the point that you had to lie down, generally speaking, we let go. But that's easy. That's a rabbinic interdiction. The reason we try to avoid medications on Shabbat is people used to make them at home. They used to concoct, what's that?
Mortar and pestle.
Yes, the famous Maharaza, mortar and pestle. You're not surprised if you didn't grow up hearing this in your grandparents' home, the Maharaza, the mortar and pestle. So they used to crush spices this way, hawaj, ginger, lots of good things used to make this way. And so we don't take medications on Shabbat, even if they're already prepared, even if they're packaged, even if we don't know how. I don't even own a mortar. That's not true. I own a mortar and pestle, but there are people who don't. I have like 3. In the event that you don't know how to make your own medications, we still forbid this rabbinically, so that you shouldn't come to make your own medication or make more of it in case you run out. But we relax the rabbinic interdiction if someone is sick enough that they had to lie down, for example. There's a discussion about this, we hold leniently. So what happens if I got really dizzy? Or if I got so nauseated that I couldn't stand up? These are the famous pregnancy questions. Right? Every year you get the same question. Normally it's the first pregnancy. I think my wife has fasted, she went through Yom Kippur pregnancy maybe 6 out of the 7 times. It's not like it can't be done, and it goes on for 9 months, so inevitably there's going to be Yom Kippur in there somewhere. What normally happens is that a woman during her first pregnancy gets really hysterical, and maybe some of the symptoms are a little bit psychosomatic. But long story short is that, oh my God, I'm pregnant. Do I have to fast in Yom Kippur? So the answer is yes. Pregnancy is not a de facto exemption from fasting in Yom Kippur. It might make you a little bit more inclined towards certain symptoms. So if you're pregnant, you're more easily dehydrated. Or you're more susceptible to nausea or vertigo, etc. If you get really sensitive and yell a lot at your husband, I mean, it doesn't necessarily qualify, but things that happen nonetheless. So these are symptoms that under normal circumstances might make you eligible for an exemption from Shabbat or Yom Kippur. So it's not the pregnancy per se that exempts you from the fast. It's just that if you do feel these circumstances, these symptoms coming on, then you'd be sensitive to this. So what do you do in such a case? Well, in the event...
So right, in these cases, I don't understand, it's included also the person who has this massive headache, and he can still function and maybe come to the Beit Knesset, which I understand is not strictly required, but if you can, it's better if you go.
For all those for the purposes of those who are present here, attendance in Beit Knesset is strictly required, specifically our Beit Knesset.
Right.
But yes, you were saying.
Yeah. So, is that warrant like maybe you can take some medication or you can eat something in order to?
So I'm getting there. We also have to be very clear on the halachic parameters of what's called transgression or violation, right? In theory, I am interested in violating Yom Kippur. I want to find the best, most effective, most efficient way of doing it. Let's say by way of eating and drinking. How do I pull this off? So if I eat a Tic Tac or a stick of gum, I haven't necessarily achieved this. I haven't accomplished my goal. It has to be considered a snack or eating that's significant enough or drinking that's significant enough to constitute something more or less normative. So how do we define this halachically speaking? We define it by eating a kazait or drinking a revi'it kos within the amount of time it takes to eat half of a small loaf of bread. Loaves of bread used to be baked for two, and you would usually eat half of one, maybe one in the morning, one in the evening. Or if you're sitting down eating with somebody else, then half for you, half for me. How long does it take to eat a loaf of bread? This is bichdei achilat piras. Piras in this case means like a half of a loaf of bread, like a purusa, like to slice something. So one opinion holds 4. I wouldn't say lenient or strict because it depends on what side of the argument you are. And one opinion holds 7 minutes. So somewhere between 4 and 7 minutes, which means if I'd like to drink as little as possible, let's say I want to drink as much as possible without violating Yom Kippur, and I want to do this by respecting both opinions, I would drink, let's say, less than 80 milliliters, I think it's 82 or 83, but less than 80 milliliters of liquid every 7 minutes. And that way I haven't drunk anything so significant that it adds up lactose. By the way, very interesting difference here between Sephardim and Ashkenazim, but it has halachic consequences outside of this context as well. What constitutes a significant enough drink that you would make a bracha achrona? You may not be familiar with this?
Is it more than a shiur or something?
Okay, so the shiur is, this everyone agrees on, revi'it kos. 1 cup is how much? It's a can of soda or a can of beer. The can is exactly the halachic cup. And so the quarter cup, the revi'it kos, the famous revi'it kos we're always talking about, how like you have to drink at least this much at Kiddush and Havdalah. So it's a can of beer or a can of soda is supposed to be the amount of beverage that one normally drinks at one sitting. So I have to drink the beer in one shot, but I'll probably finish a can from the beginning of the meal to the end of it, or a can of Coke, etc., a can of soda. So a quarter of this is about 80 milliliters. This everyone can more or less agree to. A can of beer is supposed to be about 330 milliliters. So 82 and a half, 83 is right about there. Everyone agrees on how much you'd have to drink. Let's say we have these 2 opinions as to in what period of time it has to be drunk. The difference between Ashkenazim and Sephardim is that according to the Sephardim, in order to accomplish this intentional violation of Yom Kippur, you have to drink the whole revi'it kos b'wahdu. You have to drink the whole thing from beginning to end without stopping. In other words, you'd be drinking a can of beer, a can of soda in 4 gulps, so to speak. According to Ashkenazim, even small sips count. And this is very interesting. The Tosafot talk about this in Masechet Brachot. They say that really the Mishnah and the Gemara don't prescribe a bracha achrona for beverages except for wine. So if I drank a revi'it kos of wine, I would have to make ala gefen la pre gefen, like ala mechia, but with slightly different catchphrases. And so they say the custom has become to make a bracha achrona on beverages. But the Sephardim Rishonim understood that it's considered a significant enough drink when you drank it all in one shot within this period of time. Incidentally, since when is the amount of time it takes you to eat half of a loaf of bread considered the standard for drinking? It's not necessarily clear that there's so direct a correlation, but the custom has been to use this as a standard. So, according to the Sephardim, if you want to make a bracha achrona on seltzer water, you have to drink at least, let's say, 83 milliliters within 4 minutes, and then you can make borei nefashot afterwards. According to Ashkenazim, no, not necessarily. People sometimes drink in small sips, and therefore, if you drank revi'it kos, even in sips within this period of time, it'll count. So how do we hold on Yom Kippur? Who's strict and who's lenient, so to speak?
Well, it's
I want to violate Yom Kippur. I decided that's it. I've had it. No more of the rabbi business. So, what do I do?
Sephardim are lenient.
Sephardim are lenient. Why?
Because you would have to drink the whole thing on one shot.
Because if I got milliliter 79 and I choked, or I coughed, or I hiccuped, or I don't know what, I still haven't violated Yom Kippur. According to Ashkenazim, fine. Take your next sip, then you're done. So according to Sfaradim, I put the cup down in the middle, I drank again, I still haven't violated Yom Kippur, unless one sip or the other amounted to more than a Revi'it cost.
So according to Ashkenazim, you have to wait more than 7 minutes or 4 minutes between one small sip and the other one.
According to the Ashkenazim, it's like you're firing buckshot. You're taking a bunch of sips. At no point during this sipping process should you have consumed more than 83 milliliters in less than 4 or 7 minutes. So if you have, let's do the math, 12 milliliters per minute, you're still within your limits. What's 12 minutes? About a tablespoon, a little bit more. Okay, it is what it is. But you shouldn't be playing these games if you have serious doubts, or if you're at even potentially serious condition. Like someone who's dehydrated needs more than 12 milliliters per minute in order to regain their form, and it's dangerous. You can do damage to your brain, to your kidneys. You got to be careful with things like this. Someone who's suffering from serious headache, it could be a sign of other things. It's generally recommended not to take too many chances. I must say, and it's true, that rabbis of this generation are very hesitant to rule strictly on these things because no one wants to get sued or go to jail for having recommended that you be strict. But technically speaking, I think in previous generations we expected more from people than we do currently. This is true in so many areas, but topic for another discussion. So the halachic expectations this way have been a little bit relaxed, so to speak. It's not a function of being pregnant or being sick or whatever. If I have a cold, I don't necessarily have permission to violate Yom Kippur. If I have a cold and as a result of my cold I got a massive headache or I'm dehydrated or I don't know what, so you can make a case. But it's not an illness or a pregnancy per se that exempts you, nor old age for that matter. Somebody can be really old and still fast. People fasted well beyond the age of 100. It's not like it's never been done before.
And if I have a cold and I can barely talk, and I'm the only one able to do the announcement, that's it.
Well, the announcement's
For the
pikuach
sake of,
nefesh. Someone will hang
course
you
it is.
if you're unable to fulfill this task.
Chazanim or anything like that.
Yeah, no. There is no permission. It's interesting. On Rosh Hashanah, we're a little bit lenient with drinking water. You don't have to make Kiddush drink water anyway, but we're a little bit more lenient about drinking water in order to make the tefillot. Because the reality is, if you're doing it right, and you're doing it with a little bit of force, you dry out your mouth and your lungs very quickly. So Yom Kippur, we have no such exemptions. You might be a paid chazan and you might want to, sound off a beautiful voice. It's not necessarily permission to drink. It doesn't grant you any extra permission. So
What if you
so don't sing and sit and fulfill the.
such a bad headache that you can't really read the sequel, like you can't daven?
We're a little bit funny about this, but our definition remains the same. Nafal mishkab. If you have such a bad headache that you sit but you're not happy, it's one thing. You have a bad headache and you have to put your head down because you just can't
Take it.
function anymore. Then you're already probably
And then you could take a
closer to medication, perhaps. I don't know that I would again shoot a whole cup of water. So if necessary, maybe sip it a little bit. But
And so if I have a choice between, let's say I'm a nurse or I have a nurse with me and I can just inject something quickly that will have the same effect as aspirin or swallowing an aspirin, what's better?
it's a good question.
shooting yourself.
Cut-
as well?
No, like
no, like
injection.
yeah. So
Yeah.
right. So it's a little bit quicker to inject than others.
Yeah.
So effectively, there is a separate interdiction of bruising yourself or causing yourself to bleed on Chag just because it's a torada of the melacha of shechita, believe it or not. So because it's a surah on Shabbat for us to perform shechita as a torada, as a subcategory of it, we avoid anything that has to do with causing contusions or bleeding. In other words, we try to take one step away from the melacha. So I don't know that an infusion would necessarily be a better idea than, it's maybe...
It's not midirabanan.
Well, avot melachot and the toradot is a whole other discussion, but in some cases yes, in some cases no. But yeah, if you came to a point that you needed an infusion, you may as well just drink. I don't know that we permit one instead of the other and say this is better. Like everyone who is dehydrated should get an IV and not drink a cup of water. So I came to that point. I think you'd be within your rights. But yeah, if you know of somebody who's suffering, has difficulty, pregnancy, I think most of the questions I've gotten so far are pregnancy questions. Some of them are confused. Just conclude with this because I can't go too much longer. Some of this is confused with the fact that the minor fasts, the Shulchan Aruch does hold that women who are pregnant or nursing are exempt. And the specific reason for this exemption is because these fasts are midrabanan, they're rabbinically instituted and not biblical, and therefore the Haghim who instituted them didn't institute them for everyone equally. So someone who's exceptionally old or sick or unable to fast, pregnant women, nursing women, we just assume that they're in this category. So we don't necessarily, they weren't included in the decree to begin with. In other words, when Chazal decreed that we should fast on the 9th of Av or on the ShaBaSh Tammuz, they didn't mean for pregnant and nursing women necessarily to be included. They said that too they can, but not that they're obligated to. And according to Rav Ovadia Yosef, even 2 years after she had a baby, even if she's not even nursing anymore, within the 24 months she's still permitted to skip the fast. There's no such exemption for Yom Kippur. This is midoraita. It's a totally different category. And we're a lot less quick to exempt. So if you do know someone who believes that he or she is exempt because he or she is pregnant, please spread the. This is New York. We don't discriminate based on anyone's race, age, gender, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. Right. Rewind about 20-25 minutes. The discussion about saving your life with sexual interdictions. So yes, I think that might be the origin of some of the confusion because the minor fasts are midrabanan and pregnant and nursing women aren't necessarily included in the decree from the very beginning. But Yom Kippur is definitely not in that category. So, if anybody has any personal questions that you'd like to ask out loud for everybody or in private, feel free to afterwards. I'll try to have myself available on Yom Kippur. Feel free to ask me any such questions, but those are pretty much the general rules. If you have any particular conditions that I can look up, I'd be happy to look them up for you. ShaBaSh, we should have a meaningful fast,
Amen.
and we should get there happy, healthy, and in one piece.